Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Office Hours. My name is Dave Giulio. I'm a professor of political science and director of the Center for Civic Engagement. Thanks to those who are joining us in person here in the Oakland Center's Winter Garden. Come on in, pull up a chair if you're walking by having lunch. Thanks to those who are joining via Zoom. We live in the hybrid world now, right? That's the way these things are going to probably get presented. If you are new to Office Hours, what we try to do is take a timely topic and talk to some of our faculty experts here at Oakland University who have great expertise in that particular subject area and get some information, get some more knowledge, if you will, right? And we think about it like a student would go to Office Hours, right, and ask questions. If you are a returning Office Hours participant, welcome back. We're glad you are back with us. Our topic today is sustainability and climate, policy, not politics. And yes, I have already been teased about the title, How Can You Have Policy Without Politics? Well, we are going to try and talk policy, not politics today, with two OU faculty members. On my far left, Dr. Mojgan Raji is an associate professor of public health. She serves on the board of the Michigan Environmental Council, the Great Lakes Environmental Law Center, and the Ausable Institute of Environmental Studies. She is a commissioner on the Ferndale Environmental Sustainability Commission. Her teaching and research focuses on environmental health and justice with an emphasis on disparities in exposures and spatial assessments. She holds a PhD and MPH in environmental health and sciences and an MS in environmental science from the University of Michigan. Right next to me, Dr. Chris Kobus is the Director of Engineering and Energy at the OU Incubator Clean Energy Research Center. He's also an associate professor of mechanical engineering in the School of Engineering and Computer Science. His research areas include clean energy, applied research, energy efficiency, energy management, and boundary layer theory, among others. We need to find out what boundary layer theory is. He is a member of the several professional associations, ASME, ASEE, and Tau Beta Pi, to name just three. Yeah, if you're coming in for lunch, pull up a chair. Come on over for the conversation. We will certainly have time for and invite audience questions, both here in person and from our audience on Zoom. As I said at the beginning, we envision these as being like a student goes to Office Hours and asks questions of their faculty members. So it's all question-based. And I've got some that are at the top of my list for our participants. Let's start with a broad, sort of high-level view of environmental policy, sustainability policy. What are some of the emerging environmental issues that environmental policymakers are going to have to address in the next, say, 10 or 15 years? Mojgan, you want to start?
I think the main thing the big thing that has to be tackled in the next 10 years is around climate change and trying to reduce greenhouse gases. So that's the big one, and we can talk more about that on its own. So that's the biggest one I would throw out there, because we're at a point when we need to start making changes now, because we've waited 2 decades to do anything, and so we really need to make progress now. So that's the big thing. But I do think that there's, I'm coming from an environmental health background, and so for me, the other major issue that we're going to have to deal with is related to kind of these new contaminants. They're not actually new, that are in our environment that we just have to tackle. So in Michigan, for example, we have, it's all over the U.S. actually, not just in Michigan. We have a lot of contamination from PFAS substances. So these are perfluoro and alpha substances. There's thousands of them. It's a class of different chemicals, and they were used in like non-stick coatings, firefighting foams, that type of thing. And it's all over the state, it's all over the country in various places. And so they're referred to as forever chemicals because they don't really break down. And so we have to figure out how to manage them and come up with standards to ensure people aren't exposed to levels of them that are unsafe. So Michigan has drinking water standards. EPA is working on that now, but figuring out how we manage PFAS as well as all these other things that we don't even realize are a problem yet, but will be a problem, I think are the two big things.
Rich, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I do. So just from my perspective as an engineer, sustainability in and of itself is the challenge, and it's very different. Throughout the course of human history, our biggest challenge has always been survival. How do we just stay alive the next day and have access to water and food and shelter? And that's still a challenge for much of the world. We have such a high standard of living here in the United States that we get to debate things and learn things. I mean, look, we are here at an institution of higher education. There is no institution of higher education that they dug up in Egypt next to Giza from King Tut University. We have opportunities here to be learning and discussing about things like sustainability, where much of the planet, they don't have that opportunity. And historically, our standard of living is like nothing we've ever seen. So our biggest challenge is no longer survival. It is how do you sustain the kind of standard of living that we have developed here, which has never, ever been seen in human history. One of the things I share with my classes, especially students that are coming in at sophomore level, all engineers have to learn about energy. Doesn't matter what your discipline is, mechanical, electrical, or bioengineering, energy is just part and parcel of what you learn about. And one of the things that I try to impart on them, number one, is how good we have it. And it's very hard to impart because really we grew up in this. The current generation has grown up in conveniences that historically so in history you learn about kings and queens and civilizations, and you take any monarch years past, they couldn't imagine, they couldn't even see how the average person lives in the United States, far surpassing anything that they had with all the people around them. They were still in fear of waking up with some disease the next day and dying. Technology just wasn't there. A lot of monarchs died at a young age, and survival, even for those few people that are way up there in history past, very different challenge. So how do we sustain the standard of living that's so high? Obviously, environmental consequences of that. How do we sustain this thing that we have developed? It's a blip in history.
Which is more, I would imagine, well, let me ask you this, is it more complicated to do those things, whether it's thinking about sustainability or to deal with whether it's PFAS chemicals or greenhouse gases? Is it more difficult to do that in a country like the United States where we take things for granted?
I mean, I think when I was here listening to Chris talk, I was like, oh, this is part of the problem is our standard of living. We expect excess in many ways. Like we expect anything whenever we can get it, or at any time as soon as we can get it. And that doesn't align with human history, but it also doesn't align with like the natural system of the way the world works. We can't just get whatever we want whenever we want. Like at some point, there are limits. And I think in the US in particular, we don't acknowledge those limits very well. I think we have kind of divorced ourselves culturally, mentally from the natural world and how it works. And it's kind of more of a philosophical idea, but it matters because it bears out in the way that we access our food, which is, you can buy whatever food you want, basically 100% of the time of the year. But there are consequences of that as well.
And I imagine too, it's things like if you want some toothpaste, you order it from Amazon, and the next thing you know, there's a truck in your driveway showing up, within hours sometimes, right? Well, that immediate gratification is certainly all through our society, right? Which the policy challenges are enough, but it also sounds like there's cultural challenges to this as well.
Definitely cultural challenges. And again, especially for the current generation, they have grown up I mean, they have grown up with one of these in their hands.
Yeah.
They don't know what it was like back in the day when we used to disappear after school for hours on end, come home when the sun goes down, and I'm just sitting there not worried about you. You're okay. That's just what you do every day.
So, Chris, you mentioned energy is something that all engineering students have to learn about, and no doubt that is part of the sustainability and environmental policy discussion, whether it's alternative sources, right? Whether wind, solar, nuclear, whatever it might be. As we sit here today, what's the most sustainable energy source that we have?
Okay, sustainable, clean, renewable, green, those are kind of used interchangeably.
And I imagine there's differences.
There are some differences. So this one, if you're talking about the cleanest source, and when you say clean, that's a multi-dimensional problem because it just depends what you want to go after. Are you talking environmental footprint in general? Are you talking about carbon specifically? But the cleanest energy source we have ever had is nuclear. And if the boogeyman is carbon in the atmosphere, there is no close second to nuclear as far as that goes. Not even close. So you might think, well, what about solar? What about wind? The thing is that all those technologies, every technology has an environmental consequence. It's just that with solar and wind, you don't see it at the point of use or where the energy is generated. For instance, industrial scale wind turbines, that's 1.5 megawatts or bigger per turbine. There's 11,000 cars. Where do those come from? All that material had to be mined out of the earth. That's an environmental footprint. The ore had to be processed. So you can go down this big chain, and we call it a life cycle cost analysis. So you look, everything material comes from the ground. So we call this a ground to grave analysis. Where does this stuff come from? And then you use it, it generates energy, and then you have to decommission it on the grave side of things. So when you look at a big picture of all of that, nuclear comes out by far. There is not even a close number two. But I'll tell you, the cleanest energy there ever has been or ever will be is the energy we never use. So the biggest part of my research focus is always on conservation. How can we do what we want to do using less energy? Every time we use energy, convert it from one point, there will always be a negative environmental consequence. There's laws of nature that preclude anything but that. But the energy you never use, that's 100% clean.
Go ahead, Moshe. Yeah. I was going to ask when you talk about the need to deal with greenhouse gases, is there a source that you see as best to do that?
Are you asking me?
Yeah.
So, well, I was going to actually kind of respond also what Chris said,
Great.
which is maybe we'll also answer your question. Nuclear is great in the sense, and a lot of people don't realize this, but it doesn't have the carbon emissions that most fossil fuels do, like coal and natural gas. So that's where I think it's touted as a pretty great source if you're trying to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. I would say that from the environmental health side of things and environmental justice side, there are some concerns around nuclear, specifically around like you got to mine that uranium, right? So it's a non-renewable resource, and you're mining it oftentimes in areas where you have communities of color, low-income individuals, and this is in people's communities, oftentimes indigenous lands, and those people are left with the contamination, and they're also the ones supplying the workforce oftentimes. And so you have this kind of disproportionate burden on particular communities of color and low-income communities. So that cradle to grave aspect is really important. Like, where are we getting this, and what's the end result? And so nuclear is great on the end results in some way. I should say, maybe not great. It's good in terms of carbon emissions because you do have to deal with the waste afterwards. But it's that cradle piece of where you're getting those resources that is also a concern. So I think it's important to acknowledge that. But there's not like one, like this is just going to be a perfect thing.
And I guess that's the takeaway for me, right? As somebody who doesn't know much about this, is that there's no silver bullet to solving the problem. And maybe that's good to acknowledge, right? And if there was, maybe we would have had it by now, right? So what's the preferred source of energy in the battle against greenhouse gases?
I mean, I think it's got to be a mixture of things. Solar and wind are the two big ones, particularly in Michigan, that I think are important to talk about. I always have loved solar in the sense that I'm like, there's a lot of energy coming out of the sun, and we just have to figure out how to harness that. And so that to me always has kind of stood out as something that just appreciated, because it's a form of biomimicry, right? So you're just kind of taking what plants do and mimicking that idea and using that energy. But it does come with downsides. You have to use materials to create those solar panels. Downsides, but again, in our quest to not warm the world more than a couple degrees Celsius, it might be what we need.
Are there any energy sources that are on the horizon that might be tapped into?
Fusion nuclear is 5 years away and has been since I was a kid.
For those of us who don't know what that is, can you define fusion nuclear?
Yeah, so nuclear reactors run out of a process called fission. So you take an unstable element like uranium and you split it. Uranium is an unstable element. It is actually the heaviest element found in nature. Everything past uranium is man-made. But when the uranium atom splits because it gets hit by a neutron, there's less mass of the two what are called daughter particles than what came out of that uranium atom. And that difference in the mass is a tremendous amount of heat energy that comes off. And that's how nuclear reactors run. A fusion reaction is a little different. You take some isotopes of smaller elements like hydrogen and helium, and you combine those. And again, there's a mass difference between the two original particles and the end particle, and that also gives off a lot of heat. The problem is fusion happens when you have very high pressures and temperatures. That's why your sun it's been working on fusion for quite a few years, very sustainably, I might add. The problem is that those conditions don't exist on Earth. So getting those kind of pressures and temperatures, up to this point in time, this has been going on since I was a kid. It takes more energy to initiate the reaction than the energy that you get out of it. And that is not sustainable. Of course, we want that process to be an energy winner. We want to get more out than what it takes to activate it. We just never figured out a way to do that. And, I'm in my mid-50s. I've been hearing this since I was in grade school. I'm starting to lose hope.
And I was going to say, I imagine scientists are working on that all the time, right?
Oh, sure. I mean, it exists in the Star Trek universe, but that's science fiction. So unfortunately, it does not exist in science yet.
So we started sort of at this 30,000 foot level. Let's come down to a very micro level, right? And how we see policies changing, how we see people interacting with just maybe even that lifestyle, right? And as those expectations, right? So we see people making changes or changes being mandated by policymakers, whether that's the government or a place like Oakland University, right? How do things like changing from, say, plastic straws to paper straws, where does that fit in the policy space, and what kind of a difference does that actually make? Olga?
Yeah, so a lot of us are moved by like that. I think a lot of us probably saw that like viral video of like the turtle plastic straw, and it's very moving and sad. And that's really what sparked like one viral video. What sparked like this anti-plastic straw movement. And started in some ways a conversation about plastics. And so people are now apt to, avoid a plastic straw and other individual things, but it only gets you so far. I generally would say that, a larger policy is going to be more effective than individual actions. You need both to happen in tandem. But there's this emphasis on personal kind of responsibility that is somewhat problematic from my perspective. Still important. We all have to do our part, so it's not absolving anyone. But you have sometimes those who are in certain industries who have a lot of money, and they can kind of influence how we perceive things, how the public perceives things. So For example, the ecological, there's like ecological footprints to understand like what's your impact on the environment. And that was developed in the early 90s. But then in the early 2000s, BP, the oil company, helped to develop the carbon footprint calculator, and really kind of started this campaign to try to encourage people to calculate their carbon footprints. And people started doing that. Part of what they did is they're actually borrowing from what the tobacco industry had done, which was shifting responsibility from the industry and their responsibility of contributing and marketing tobacco products and cigarettes to the individual and saying, you need to lower your emissions and lower your carbon footprint. So it puts the onus on the individual. Meanwhile, they're not necessarily becoming more energy efficient and they're increasing their oil drilling. And so there is, I think, public pressures that can mislead people to think, if I do this, I'm solving these problems. But you're not. You can only do so much, right? Like people have asked me, like, do I have an electric car? No, I don't have one because I have an existing gas-powered car that I have, and I'm not going to pay a lot of money to get a new car because my car currently works, right? And there's a financial hurdle for me. Those barriers matter. And so like thinking about that level of like, there's only so much an individual can do, particularly if you talk about low income.
That's really interesting, right? Because it is, in political science, we talk about this in terms of policy making and getting a sort of a big enough coalition together to support serious change, right? And you need to have this winning coalition. Well, there are certainly free rider problems when it comes to that sort of thing. So certainly individuals can be free riders. Can nations also be free riders or avoid? I'm thinking about big industrialized countries that don't have the same focus. Maybe free rider is not the way to put it, but it's sort of how I think about it in my head, right? You think about big industrialized countries that aren't maybe as serious about policy change as the United States and others. I mean, what's the challenge there with getting the world to act rather than just individual nations?
I think globally that's a bigger challenge than nationally because most of the rest of the world is far less developed than we are. So there are countries out there that want to be where we are. It's a chasm between where they're at. Now, are they gonna, as a policy, limit that development or not? And when their focus is still on survival, trying to get to where we are, they're gonna have far less incentives to put any kind of policies in place that will slow that down. This is a fact that's not as well known amongst environmentalists, but China outputs far more carbon than we do. They have ramped up power generation, and the amount of resources they're using is just going up a huge amount. They are considered a less developed country. They're not even mid-developed, much less developed like we are. So they still got a ways to go. And as they get more electrical generation online, for instance, their carbon footprint, ours is going to be dwarfed by theirs. It's already several times what we output. So our carbon footprint has went down over the last 10 years. A large part of that is because we're decommissioning coal and replacing that with natural gas, which burns a whole lot cleaner. Fracking is responsible for a lot of that. But in other countries, coal, okay. So coal is dirt cheap. Anybody know why coal is dirt cheap? It's dirt. Thank you very much. Most students in my classes come and they can't answer that question. It's dirt. You cannot get cheaper than that. So if you come to me and say, hey, I invented this new clean technology that's cheaper than coal, you're going to get a kind of a weird look from me because that's not possible, sir. I mean, there are ways to achieve that with government regulation, but coal is being used quite a bit in these developed countries, and that's not going to change. And their incentive not to use it is very low.
And we use coal. Like that's part of the reason where we are is because we used our cheap, dirty energy, right? And so there is like a kind of a justice issue of like, is it fair for us to say these countries can't do that? When we did the exact same thing, like we put out a lot. And I would actually say that the US is one of the largest emitters of carbon dioxide throughout history. Our population works. I mean, China has like 1 billion more people than the US does. So their emissions should be a lot higher than ours if you just look at proportionally.
Sure.
And so, like, part of the problem, to go back to what we said earlier, is, you know, people in China, as well as the rest of the world, they look at what's going on in the US and they want our lifestyle. They want our excess and all of the resource exploitation that comes with that. They don't think of necessarily that piece of it. And so it's people also emulating, I think, what they're seeing.
Yeah, that's a really interesting component to this that I don't think a lot of people think about is the other countries trying to catch up to where we are. And, you know, who's the United States to come along and say, you can't use coal, you can't use the cheap avenue to getting to a quote unquote better place, right? I mean, that's something to think about, right? I mean, and as you know, it's a justice issue, right? That a fairness issue almost.
Yeah, the one thing I'll just quickly add is the Paris Agreement that was passed, or not passed, that was ratified in 2015. A component of that drew a lot of criticism is that higher income countries actually put in a fund for low income countries to help kind of use these more expensive and cleaner fuels. And people are like, well, why is the US and all these other wealthy countries, you know, helping to offset that? That's why, right? Is it's an acknowledgement that we've done this and you know, we don't want these other lower income countries to do what we did because that just increases climate risk.
So the discussion or the conversation around energy, around emissions, et cetera, it's not at a boiling point, but it's at an important point for us, right? As we see what's happened with gas prices over the last several years, people are paying more attention to those issues, I think, at this point, right? In terms of why gas prices have gone up, why people might be thinking of transitioning to an electric vehicle, but facing those cost challenges. And in fact, that became a point of contention in the gubernatorial race over the last week or so, with Governor Whitmer saying she's going to get an electric vehicle, and Tudor Dixon saying that's great, but I can't afford it. Whether we can get into the political debates about that at another time, but that's a legitimate point, right? And which she's raised, right? So what about this shift that we're seeing now with the big three auto companies talking about move to all electric? California has just pledged to limit or ban the sale of internal combustion engine cars by 2035. Comments on the electrification movement, maybe in general or specifically about the auto industry?
Yeah, I guess I'll start off. So if we transitioned over to all vehicles being electric, the amount of energy that is used by the transportation sector is huge. The number one user of all energy is the built environment. That's buildings, that's commercial buildings, that's homes, that's municipal buildings. This building that we're in right now, the built environment, that's number one. Transportation's number two. It's huge. Now, if you're going to transition away from that, for the purpose of transitioning away from petroleum, now you have a whole lot of extra generating needs. The current grid is not going to handle it, not even close. We would need to more than double the number of power plants out there. And we can't do that with wind and solar that are not controllable sources. Those would have to be conventionally run power plants or nuclear.
What do you mean by conventionally run?
Fossil fuels. Because there's things that we control. Nuclear would be my preference, but we can't. There is still some doubt in my community that there's enough rare earth materials to run the entire plant on solar. So rare earth materials are materials that are not found in huge deposits anywhere. You've got to mine a huge volume of earth for a little bit of its stuff. And unfortunately, you need those kind of materials to make solar run.
Are those things that go into solar panels?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and those are just hard to get. There's just not a lot of stuff out there. That's why it's rare. So I do own 2 electric vehicles. I love them. They're cheaper to drive, just cost per mile, than any other vehicle out there. And that's true. But I'm also cognizant of the fact that most of the energy that I use in my car is coming from coal power plants that BP is running. So I don't claim that I am somehow clean because I drive an electric vehicle.
And Mojgan, you want to jump in on that?
I mean, a lot of great things, like I said. The other thing I'll just add is, I would love for us to also just get out of our individual cars. Like that's part of the problem is that we think, oh, we'll just move to everyone having an electric car and we're good. You have these like energy like limitations, but also like just take a bus. You know, like there's other things we can do that would make a really big difference and help to address that energy crisis. And you have all of the impacts of the transportation sector, just the infrastructure of it as well.
And I'll just add that people complaining about high gas prices, the only reason that they complain about the price of gasoline is because they actually fill up several times a month, once a week, twice a week, whatever it is, and they actually have to pay that bill right there. If it was a monthly thing that they paid, like the electric bill and the natural gas bill that they pay for their homes, they wouldn't complain about it at all.
A little more
Most
hidden
people-
cost, and or
No,
not,
just because they're
not right up front.
because they see that cost when they swipe their credit card. If it was so, electric bills have gone up quite a bit here in Michigan over the years. Nobody complains about it. Natural gas bills have gone up. Nobody complains about it. I ask students that are coming in my class every semester. They don't even know what they're paying for with natural gas and electricity. So they don't even know that electricity is billed in kilowatt hours. They don't know that natural gas is billed in cubic feet. They don't even look at the bill. It's so cheap that they just pay it and move on with their life. If gasoline was like that, they wouldn't be complaining about that either.
Is it because it's cheap, or is it because it is what it is?
It's
Right?
cheap. It's cheap.
Okay. A question from Patrick in our Zoom audience, and I think that gets back to some aspects of the point made about transportation. We should talk about regional transit too. That's a big policy issue, certainly here in Oakland County. But from Patrick, do you see, or how do you see the balance between stationary and mobile power? What are the impacts on transportation in an electrified world based on stationary sources, wind, solar, nuclear?
Stationary, I'm not 100% sure what is meant by
I'm not either.
non-stationary sources.
That's like coal-fired power plants, buildings.
Okay, but that's pretty much all power generation. There's nothing really mobile out there. I mean,
Okay. Patrick, maybe you can rephrase and send in your question again. So I can maybe read it in a more intelligent way. And others and let me ask our in studio audience, if you will. If you've got questions, shout them out. We'll repeat them to our guests so that the folks on Zoom can hear. If you've got something, just raise your hand, just like in class. Becca.
I appreciate both of our speakers and your expertise. I'm wondering if you have any suggestions for how organizational policies at Oakland University can be part of a sustainability.
Policies that Oakland University can put in place to be part of the
Oh,
sustainable.
I can.
Let's hold that one for the end. That's coming up on my list. And I know Chris is chomping at the bit, but I'm going to settle him down a little bit. Because I want to stay on electrification and automobiles, transit, right? So we've got a transit question here in Oakland County about, and this has been years that this question has sort of wrangled policymakers in the region, right? About regional transit, opt-in communities versus opt-out communities, where, you know, how can we have a regional transit when not everybody's involved, not everybody's part of the system. And I also wonder what you think about the cultural aspect that's here in Southeast Michigan, the auto capital of the world, right? How big of a battle is that to overcome if we're going to move to a point where not everybody drives their own car but hops on a bus? Where should policy priorities be for regional transit, in your opinion?
Well, I'll answer one of your questions about the barriers and then get to the policy. I think it's a major barrier being in this area, this region of Southeast Michigan, the Motor City area, because when I talk to students or I talk to folks about taking public transit or trains, buses, a lot of people have never done that in my classes, and the idea of it is like, it's not that effective. This is going to waste my time. I'm going to be around people I don't want to be around. And a lot of that stems from the fact that they haven't had the opportunity to experience that here. And I think we are in many ways sheltered from the rest of the world doesn't operate like this. And it could be really awesome if we had that. But because we don't have it, we see a fractured system, which is what we have now, which is the system where communities get to opt in or opt out of whether or not they want to be part of, let's say, the smart bus service. And so that means there's a bus that comes here to Auburn Hills right now, but you can't take that bus to Rochester or Rochester Hills because they're opt out, they haven't opted in. So that's part of what people see and this doesn't work. And they're right that doesn't work well. And it makes sense that people perceive it so negatively. So that's a challenge I think we have. And it's fair, but the problem is around doing, right? We've created not us, but people have created this problem and in many ways kind of made a public transit system that is not as effective as it should be, so people don't want to participate. In terms of the policy changes, I mean, we need public transit.
Is it as simple as mandating? Look, we're changing this policy. We're going to have a regional transit, and you can't get away from it. Can't opt out.
Yeah. Well, so what's on the ballot is whether or not the entire Oakland County, for Oakland County voters at least, opts in to the smart village and the smart services. And there is no opt out. No individual community can then opt out. And part of the criticism, particularly northern Oakland County communities have had is we're kind of far off. Are we going to get the same benefit as some of these denser communities in southern Oakland County? And that's fair. But at the same time, this could open up all sorts of opportunities and access to other communities that they haven't had. And particularly for low-income residents, this is a way to actually get around. But it's much more affordable than owning a car, electric or not. So opting in for the entire county, and I would say broadly, having more public transit and having it be affordable is a really important tool to get people to actually utilize it. And once they're utilizing it, you can expand those services.
Chris, you want to jump in on that?
Yeah, I think in the future, one of the sea changes that we're looking at, and this has been in conversations for a little while, nobody has mentioned autonomous vehicles. I think there's going to come a point in the future where indeed people will not own cars. They will own a subscription to a ride service where an autonomous car will come pick you up and take you to work. And this could be through the auto manufacturers. Between GM, between big three and companies like Lyft and Uber, there's partnerships that have already been formed. And now this is going to be way off into the future. It's not something that we're going to see in the next year, not going to see in this decade. But eventually, I think there's going to be a shift. There's going to be less owners of car and a lot more owners of a service.
That's interesting. I wonder how that works within the immediate gratification. I want to go somewhere now culture that we have, right? I mean,
yeah, well, right now, I mean, Uber does exactly that. If you really want to go somewhere, you don't own a car, you get an Uber ride. It's just that it's more expensive than going on a bus.
Except if you want to go there right now and your Uber driver is 17 minutes away, yeah. Or it's at a peak time, right? And it's $1 million or so it seems for a ride away from the concert venue, right? Let's go back to the transit piece too. And what about folks who look at the Q line downtown and wonder about the cost? And because it was what, $140 million to build that. How much ahead does that kind of project get us? And there's questions about ridership. Are people actually using it, right? I mean, I don't know. I just sort of throw that out for your comment and opinion.
I love trains. I love public transit. I love all the public transit. I love trains. I love buses. I think they're fabulous. So many reasons. Trains are great, and people like trains. They would much prefer them over buses, for example. Trains are really expensive, though, and the queue line is expensive. That's a great example of that. And oftentimes, the ridership of the people who ride trains is usually wealthier and it's more expensive, and the people who ride buses are usually less wealthy. And so the public perception is like, I would rather ride a train than ride a bus. Because I don't want to be about hanging out with all the people who are oftentimes lower income. There's also oftentimes racism that's kind of a layer of that as well. But you know, if you're thinking about what's the most affordable and efficient public transit option to use, it's buses. Buses, you can just you don't have to lay the tracks. You can just set out a bus, find a bus, and come up with a route, and you can do that. And that is much more affordable. You can change it and modify it much more easily than you can train routes. But again, there's the public perception of buses, which is pretty negative. And so if we were able to get past that hurdle, I think that's a much more viable path forward. The queue line, it's nice. It's slow. It doesn't go very far. I think it's like 3 miles long,
Yeah, right.
So it's not gonna change how people get around in a drastic way when you're talking about commuters.
Well, and that's kind of what I mean, right? I mean, if it went from downtown Detroit all the way upward to Pontiac, then we're talking, right?
Yeah.
At least a little bit, right? But what would be the price tag on that? And I think people look at it and go, 140 million for 3 miles. Good golly, what's it going to be to go 15 or 25, right?
Yeah.
Wow.
We've got a smart fast bus that goes up Woodward from downtown Detroit all the way up to Pontiac. So you can take that for $2-ish, $2.50.
So another cultural change that would have to come along to convince people that the bus is the place to go. Any other audience questions before we go right to Becca's question? Yes, sir.
Just point out, we're having this discussion about climate change and CO2. Massive CO2.
I guess there's some irony in that. Yeah, fair enough.
Just curious, what are you going to do when you want to change the grid, change anything, build anything? The fact is, it's almost impossible to build anything. You can't build a sucker. You can't build a dam. You can't build a power plant. It takes a dozen years for the license to train California to do construction forever. It's still not enough. How do we change that?
So, and forgive me if I'm not stating your question appropriately for our Zoom folks here, but building things is a problem, right? Permitting, licensing. How do we do that if we want to build big things like different power plants or a train line, that sort of stuff? What's the thoughts on that?
I wish we'd be building current design power plants rather than operating these old dinosaurs from many decades back. Being that, since I mentioned nuclear, we haven't built a nuclear plant since the 80s. And those 80s plants are 1960s designs. We have 2022 designs that are far more efficient, they're better, they're safer, and we just can't build them.
And I think that's the last one, they're safer, right? I mean, that's the big concern, given Chernobyl. I think the conflict in Ukraine has raised questions about nuclear plants there and nuclear sites. People are nervous about, rightly so, I think, or maybe not really. So what do you think? Are nuclear power plants a safe option?
Yes, and since you mentioned Chernobyl, you can't have Chernobyl represent the nuclear power industry. If any of you get a chance to see on HBO Max, they do have a miniseries, a 5-episode miniseries called Chernobyl.
It's really good.
Which is an indictment of government policy, not of the technology. That's where the problem is over there. So that accident was not indicative of the nuclear industry in large. But the designs they have for nuclear power generation today, which we, by the way, cannot build, is absolutely incredible. It blows away anything that we have. Fermi 2, those are GE Mark III. That's a GE Mark III reactor, same one that went down Fukushima a little over 10 years ago. We're still using them. I mean, it's 1960 design. very unlikely we're going to have a combination of a tidal wave after a giant earthquake here, but we're using 1960s designs and we can't build new ones. And that's just a really weird thing.
And if you live near a power plant, if it is a coal-fired power plant, you're at a much greater risk for health problems than if you're next to a nuclear power plant, assuming there are no accidents
Sure,
or other
of course.
issues. You know, our existing power plants are generally more of a risk to the people living near them.
Of course.
Of course, like you said before, there are other risks to consider.
Sure.
But just worth noting, right?
Yeah, of course.
There are problems.
Did I see another hand? Yes, ma'am.
So, I have a question about this coveted American lifestyle. The footprint is so large, just to look around it. I grew up in China. I remember the days most people pedal their bikes to their work or school or on foot. But then all of a sudden we started seeing the American supermarket and cars. And now after so many years of being here, it turned out that the American supermarket's lifestyle is pivoted towards locally grown foods, which we had in the 1990s in China. And is it possible that the American lifestyle could shrink us back to walkability and sustainability and locally grown, sustainable food? And where you don't really have to venture so far out. Yes, public transit works in densely populated areas, but if everything is still going to be, for instance, Adams Road is being considered to be white, are we just all going to get the suburbia bigger? Or is it possible that we can work together to shrink us back to humans? And what lifestyle is that? And who are we going to follow for an actually helpful lifestyle?
So for those on Zoom, the question is about footprint, and could we be seeing a shift back away from maybe sprawl, to use a one word, back to more locally sourced, more locally grown items given urban farms, et cetera, et cetera. Thoughts?
I do think there's actually a lot happening with that, and it's really like, I appreciate your question because also I'm like, oh, let's talk about something hopeful because we don't always do that well. But yeah, there is a movement happening of like local food, and people care about walkability now in a way they didn't, in the 40s and 50s and 60s. People are like, I just want to live in a subdivision that takes me 3 minutes to drive out of the subdivision to get to the main road, So things are shifting. That's slow though, right? So it's not going to cause drastic change, and it does take a while for that to really impact a lot of people. So I do think there's hope in that because of this shift, and it is changing the dynamics of what foods are available. Farmers markets are much more popular now than they used to be. I think like the idea of widening a road would have been probably green-lighted in a lot of communities, 20 years ago. It wasn't that like, of course, why wouldn't we do that? There's traffic. This is a way to address that. Now people second guess that in a way that we weren't doing before. And that's because we have evidence to show you widening a road doesn't actually reduce traffic. It's the idea of like, if you build it, they will come. And more drivers will come to this now, 4-lane road. And so people are starting to catch on to that, and it's starting to shift, but it's going to be slow. So it is something that gives me hope. I don't think there's going to be massive change in the next 10 years, but the change is happening.
If you wanted to build rain garden in suburbia, you would have to have HOA approval for deviation from your existing policies.
So even local ordinances and things can get in the way. Yeah.
There's so much delay. You don't want to be involved, but there are just all these hurdles, and we don't know who to look to.
Yeah.
Actually, part of this.
And Michigan for a long time had a right to farm ordinance that really got scaled back in the last few years, and that's a real shame. Because I think everybody should grow some of their own stuff. I mean, I would love to do that. My age would never allow that.
One quick thought
Go ahead.
with that too is, there's a lot people can do on the local level. And I'm a huge advocate for that. I'm on a sustainability commission in the city of Ferndale where I live. And, like was mentioned, some cities have ordinances that prohibit, messy looking yards. AKA like just having a prairie in part of your yard. Is actually prohibited in a lot of communities. But like in Ferndale where I live, residents came together and they changed the ordinance. So there's a native plant ordinance and you can have native plants in your yard. Your yard can look a little less manicured and that's okay. And so it's residents coming together and changing that. So I think there's a lot people can do at the local level that makes a really big difference. Like that's the bread and butter of it.
Maybe a somewhat related question from somebody on Zoom. How does eating with the seasons help the environment? I can sort of guess what that means, but
Not 100% sure what eating with the seasons means.
I imagine eating what's in season.
Oh,
Yeah.
well, with a global economy, everything's always in season. I mean,
Which is that not part of the problem, right? Is that
it depends who you are.
yeah, fair enough, fair enough.
Yeah, the average piece of food travels 1,200 miles or something to get to your plate, basically.
Yeah.
That's obscene.
And it's
Especially-
still fresh.
right.
Yeah.
And so in Michigan, fun fact, we can grow the second most number of crops only in California. So we grow a lot of
Wow.
things. Yeah, a lot of agriculture happens here.
Real quick, Dave Strubler.
So on a local, state, national level, maybe global level, can we take a more both and integrated approach here? And I'll just use one example that the two of you brought up. So we want to extend electric vehicles, right? Because they're clean. Okay, but they're expensive. So we take Chris's idea and we say, okay, let's expand a nuclear power plant, but let's go nuclear. Now we just solve both problems, and we use clean, safe energy source. Plus, we have electric vehicles. As an example.
Dave, you're making too much sense. That's never going to fly.
But you also need protections for those who are mining the uranium. We need our laws, which are terrible for protecting workers oftentimes.
So,
So
all right,
we need that too.
Not just both in, all in.
Yeah.
Okay.
In our a few remaining minutes, we'll finally return to Becca's question. But in addition to being professors at OU, Chris and Mojgan are co-chairs of the Sustainability Task Force. Is that the name of it? Along with Chris Reed, who's outside of camera shot.
And we're still working on the final name. This is like S.H.I.E.L.D. in the early Marvel movies.
Okay.
They have this big long name. And, we're working on it. That's what
Okay,
Colson
all right,
said.
all right,
We're working on it.
So we'll call it task force for our purposes here. You guys call it whatever you want. But what's the goal of that sustainability initiative? What's first on the agenda? What's next on the agenda? What has OU done already in the sustainability area? What are we doing here on campus?
Oh, if I can jump into that, because that's got a lot to do with energy, and I will always pounce on that. So, one of the problems is, myself and a couple of energy professors here, we partner with facilities management because they run all the buildings, they run the entire campus, and there's been tons of projects that have been done over the years. Nobody really knows about them, and that's one of the things that's lacking here is that story is not told. How much more energy we're saving. One of the really neat things about energy is that not only can you help the environment by reducing your use, but it's less dollars leaving the university's pocket, for instance. So it's a win-win from a financial perspective. And that's why major energy projects on campus have flown. It's because eventually they save money. The biggest one in recent years, I think a lot of you may know that most of the buildings here on campus are heated and cooled with hot water that's generated in the central heating plant right by the rec center. That's a natural gas plant, just a bunch of water heater boilers in there, getting that natural gas from Consumers Energy. every time a new building came up, you just put another boiler in place to meet that extra capacity. But what they did back in 2016 was they replaced a lot of the older boilers with what's called a combined heat power system, a micro turbine. So this is a generator. By the way, if you have power outage and you have a generator on side of your house that kicks in, those generators are about 25% efficient at producing your electricity. The other 75% is mostly heat that just goes out. Now, if you can capture that heat and use it to heat your space and heat your water, then you can capture a lot more of that energy and you're not wasting so much. So they replaced a lot of the boilers here. We actually have a cogen unit that produces electricity for a campus, a few megawatts of electricity for a campus. And we use the waste heat to heat that water loop that is now servicing all the buildings. So we are better utilizing the natural gas that we are getting.
More efficient, more effective.
More efficient, more effective, and it's costing us less. Yeah, and that was a big project. Now, for that project, that microturbine, the return on investment, when it pays for itself with savings that you get on the back end, 7 years, which for a technology that's going to last for decades, was an excellent investment. But that was a multi-million-dollar investment the university had to make. But it made sense.
Yeah.
And by the way, in your own homes, you can be more energy efficient, but you have to have an upfront cost to, for instance, change out your lights with the best LED lights that are out there right now. Insulate your house better, caulk and seal and all this other stuff. But it pays for itself in the near future. The payback period on some of those is months, not years. So that's just one example. LED lights we've had for almost 10 years here on campus. That was a project we partnered with DTE. I was involved in that project. We were testing out like 7 different lighting products because DTE wanted to roll those out. So we got some funding from DTE to do that. But there's a lot of projects like that, improving energy efficiency of individual buildings, service performance contract. It's just that the stories are not out there. That's one of the things that we need to do. That's part of the sustainability effort, is to let people know what we're doing on all these different fronts, on the academics, on recycling, on energy, all the way across the board. That's part of it.
Yeah, in terms of what our next steps are, I mean, we want to look at sustainability like very holistically. So energy is part of that, but looking at waste and transportation and food, you know, like all of the things. We want to be as expansive as we can. So one of our more immediate next steps is this month is the Sustainability Month, and so we have a number of events. We encourage folks to be a part of that, but one of those events is to seek input from folks who are part of our community on what they want to see in sustainability, because it shouldn't just be the 3 of us making decisions about what is most sustainable. And you can get great ideas. People have great ideas. So we want to hear that. So we want people to be involved. And really the next step is kind of creating specific goals and objectives for short, medium, long term, and then coming up with strategies to try to reach those goals.
You just answered my last question, at least in part, which is how can students, faculty, staff, maybe even the community get involved with this sustainability initiative? Are there things beyond ideas that they could do?
I mean, reach out to us. If you go to oakland.edu/sustainability, you can find out more information about all the events, but also has information, I think, to contact us on there, or you can just look up our emails.
Yeah.
And contact us to get involved, because we don't have, we're limited here because we don't have like sustainability officer leading this. Like we're professors, we have other stuff we do here at work. So we have limited time, so we need help. So anyone who wants to be part of that work, we gladly welcome you.
And students in particular, they do have some avenues. There are students group on campus. For instance, from engineering, I am one of 2 faculty advisors for Engineers for a Sustainable World, ESW. And we have a great group of students that just want to get ideas out and do some analysis and look at, hey, what if we electrify the campus a little more? And we're always working on something.
That's awesome. Thank you both for your time today. It was a terrific conversation. Thanks to our audience here in person at the Oakland Center. Thanks to our audience on Zoom. Join us in about a month. November 3rd will be our next office hours right back here in the Oakland Center. It'll be myself and a poli-sci colleague, Nicole Matthew, giving you a preview of Election Day, which at that point will be 5 days away. Thanks again for being here, and look out for the next office hours opportunity. Appreciate it.